Leah was standing in my kitchen at 11:30 on a Thursday night, holding a wooden spoon, like it had done something personally wrong to her, staring into a pot of what was supposed to be tomato soup, but had somehow become something closer to a science experiment, gone quiet. "It's not supposed to look like this," she said. "What's it supposed to look like?" "Red. Smooth like soup." I looked over her shoulder. It was red technically. "It looks like soup to me." "It looks like a crime scene, Noah." I bit the inside of my cheek. She was right, a little. There were chunks floating near the edges that had no business being there, and the whole thing had this slightly volcanic texture, like it was deciding whether to commit to being food or not. I reached past her for the wooden spoon. She handed it over without arguing, which meant she was more rattled than she was letting on. The reason we were in my kitchen at 11:30 on a Thursday instead of at Leah's place was that her building stove had stopped working 2 days ago, and her landlord had texted back with looking into it, and then, presumably, disappeared into a dimension where maintenance requests went to die. I had told her she could use mine whenever. She had texted at 9:45 that night with, "Tried to eat cereal for dinner. Failed morally. Is your offer still open?" I had said yes before I finished reading the message. That happened with Leah. She sent something, and I was already answering before my brain caught up. It had been like that for 4 years. 4 years of the kind of friendship that builds itself in the margins of normal life. She had moved into my building's neighborhood the spring after I started working at the landscape architecture firm on Wellington. After this, we met at the coffee place on the corner. She had been one person behind me in line, and when the barista got my order wrong and handed me an oat milk latte, when I had asked for black coffee, Leah had leaned in and said, very quietly, "You don't look like an oat milk person." I told her I wasn't. She said, "Didn't think so." And then she ordered her own black coffee, and we stood at the pickup counter in silence that somehow felt like a conversation. She lived 3 blocks away. She worked in graphic design out of a studio on Queen Street West. She had strong opinions about public transit, movie sequels, and the correct way to peel a mango, all of which she shared freely and without being asked. Within 6 months, she had a key to my place, because I had a better parking spot near the farmer's market, and she had strong feelings about Saturday morning produce. Within a year, she was the person I texted when something annoying happened at work. Within 2 years, she was the first call I made when my dad had a health scare. Nothing, but felt like everything for about 48 hours. People assumed things. Of course they did. My coworker Glenn had asked once, casually, at a work thing where I'd brought her along, "So how long have you two been together?" And Leah had looked at him with total composure and said, "We're not. We're just the type of people who share a grocery list." Glenn had nodded like that made sense, even though it didn't, really. We never corrected people fast. That was probably its own kind of answer, if I had been paying the right kind of attention. In the kitchen, I stirred the soup in a slow circle and watched the chunks start to break down a little under the heat. "Did you blend this at all?" I blended it. It re-chunked. Soup doesn't re-chunk, Ape. This one did. This soup is working against me. You have to blend it while it's still hot. Leah made a sound that was halfway between exasperated and offended. That information would have been useful 6 minutes ago. You didn't ask. I didn't know I needed to. I handed the spoon back to her. She stirred with more aggression than the soup required. The kitchen smelled like garlic and tomato, and a little like the basil she had torn up aggressively and thrown in from memory, because she didn't have the recipe in front of her. And, according to Leah, recipes were suggestions more than rules, which was a philosophy that explained a lot about the current situation. She had brought over her own groceries in a reusable bag from the LCBO, which she had been using as a regular shopping bag for so long the branding was almost worn off. She had also brought a block of Parmesan, a sleeve of crackers, and one pair that she had announced she was eating as an appetizer and then eaten on my couch while critiquing the documentary I had paused. When she arrived, the pair was good though, she said now, like she was reading my thoughts, which was one of the unsettling things she did with a frequency that I had stopped commenting on years ago. That's not the challenge here. No, the challenge is the soup. The soup is a secondary challenge. She looked at me sideways. What's the primary challenge? I kept my eyes on the pot. Hunger. She accepted this. The stove made a quiet ticking sound. Outside, a streetcar went by on Queen. That familiar rumble that had been the background of my nights in this neighborhood for 3 years. It was already mid-November. The windows had started doing that thing, where they fogged slightly at the edges. When you ran the stove, which I actually liked. That small domestic evidence that inside was warmer than outside. By the time the soup was ready, it had improved significantly from its earlier state. We ate at my kitchen table with bowls and crackers, and the Parmesan she grated directly over everything in quantities that suggested she had not eaten a full meal since the stove died. I've been eating a lot of sandwiches, she confirmed when I pointed this out. You could have said something earlier. I was fine. Were you? I was managing. She tore a cracker in half. There's a difference. There was a difference. With Leah. She was one of those people who was genuinely capable of handling things on her own, which she did, regularly, without complaining about it, which meant that when she did say she needed something, she actually needed it. I had learned early on that the way to help her wasn't to offer constantly, but to just be available, to make the offer once and mean it. She was the type who would take you up on it when and mattered. She had texted at 9:45 on a Thursday when she was hungry and her stove was broken. She had meant it mattered. I thought about that while we ate, not in a way I could have articulated out loud. Just in the background, the way some thoughts live in the margins of everything else. She had a project deadline the next morning, something with a rebrand for a client in Kitchener, and she had brought her laptop and was planning to work after dinner. I knew this because she had told me when she arrived, the way she always told me the practical details of her plans without being asked. Like she knew I'd want to know the shape of the evening. She always did that. Gave me context. Without me asking, I had never told her I noticed it. After dinner, she settled onto the couch with her laptop, and I sat in the chair across from her, with a book I was only half reading. The apartment was quiet in the way it got late at night, when the building settled around you. A lamp on in the corner. The radiator, doing its periodic creaking. Leah was working with her knees pulled up. The laptop balanced on a pillow she'd claimed, without asking from the far end of the couch. She was wearing one of those oversized sweatshirts. Sweatshirts she always wore when she wasn't working. A heathered gray thing from her university. She'd had since before I knew her. The cuffs permanently stretched from being pulled over her hands. She had her hair up in the most efficient possible way, not styled, just out of her face, the way she looked when she wasn't performing anything for anyone. She looked like she belonged on my couch. She had looked like that for a while, and I was good at not thinking about it directly. Write in the comments. Should I have said something that night? Or kept quiet and protected what we already had? Around 11 I put the book down and said I was going to make tea, and she said, "Yes please," without looking up, which I had somehow learned to take as its own kind of intimacy. She trusted me to know how she took it. She was right to. I made it without asking. I set her mug on the coffee table. She looked up then just briefly, and said, "Thank you," in the quieter way she had, when she actually meant it. Not the cheerful reflexive one, the real one. I sat back down. The radiator creaked. She went back to her laptop. About 20 minutes later she said, without any preamble, "My sister asked about you." I looked up from the book. "Yeah?" At Thanksgiving, she wanted to know if you were still single. I waited for a follow-up that didn't come immediately. What did you tell her? I told her yes. She still hadn't looked up. She said that was surprising. Why surprising? Leah closed the laptop halfway. Just halfway. Like she needed to think but wasn't ready to fully stop doing something else. She said you don't seem like someone who would stay single that long unless you were waiting for something. The radiator made its noise. Outside, somewhere down the block, a car alarm went off and stopped almost immediately, like even it couldn't commit to the bit. Your sister said that? She has opinions. Leah's voice was careful in a way it wasn't usually. She was always direct. Leah said what she thought without a lot of engineering around it. This was different. She's also been married for 6 years and thinks it gives her visibility on other people's situations. What do you think? She looked at me then. She had been avoiding it and then she stopped avoiding it. Which was somehow its own kind of answer. Her eyes were the color of creek water in the fall, which was the kind of thought I had trained myself not to finish. I think you make choices, she said, about where you spend your time. She said it like it was a neutral observation, and not a thing that had been sitting between us for 4 years. I set my book down on the arm of the chair, carefully, like I was clearing space for something. You're asking something, I said. I'm not. You're doing the thing where you say a thing but mean something adjacent to it. I do not do that, Leah. I do not do that, Leah. She looked at the closed laptop. Maybe I'm asking something. There were about 40 different ways I could have handled the next 10 seconds. I knew them all. I had used most of them before, in conversations that came close to this one, and then pulled back. I was good at the pivot, the joke that landed just right, the way of acknowledging something, without actually acknowledging it. 4 years of careful maintenance. The lamp in the corner threw everything in warm light. The mug she'd been drinking from was still on the coffee table, half full, her fingers around it loosely. Okay, I said. What are you asking? She exhaled. Not loudly, just enough that I heard it in the quiet. Why haven't you dated anyone seriously in 2 years? I've gone on dates. That's not what I asked. She was right. I had gone on dates. A woman named, I'd gone on several dates actually. Someone from a friend of a friend thing at a birthday party in Leslieville. Someone I'd met through a work event who was smart and easy to talk to and had thought I was funny. Someone from an app who had loved hiking and had correctly identified that Kensington Market had gotten too expensive and had been a genuinely good person. None of them had become anything. I had told myself I was picky. I had told myself I was busy. I had told myself that I valued my independence. Which was true, just not the whole truth. The whole truth was sitting on my couch with a half-empty mug of tea and a laptop she hadn't fully closed. I don't know, I said, which was a lie. And by the way she looked at me, she knew it was a lie, which was perhaps the most unsettling part. Noah. I know, that's not an answer, I know that too. She waited. That was the thing about Leah. She didn't fill silences. She let them exist until something real came into them. It was one of the things that made her easy to talk to and, right now, one of the things that made this impossible to escape. I leaned forward in the chair, my elbows on my knees, looking at the coffee table between us. I think, I said, that I compare everyone to a specific standard. I heard her not say anything, and I think that standard is not hypothetical. The radiator. The lamp. The muffled sound of November outside the window. How long? She said finally. Her voice came out quieter than I think she intended. Honestly? Obviously honestly. A while. I looked up at her. Maybe the second winter. Maybe earlier. Leah stared at me. She had this expression I had seen maybe twice in 4 years, where all the composure she usually carried around like a second jacket just went somewhere. She looked uncertain. It didn't suit her, and it also made something in my chest pull in a direction I hadn't let it pull in a long time. The second winter, she said. like she was checking whether she'd heard that right. There was that snowstorm in January, and you showed up at my door at 7 in the morning because you couldn't get your car out, and you needed a ride to a client meeting, and you'd brought coffee because you didn't want to show up empty-handed, even though I was doing you a favor. I paused. You'd bought it from the place you knew I liked. Not the closest one. The one 3 blocks further. She was very still. I remember thinking that was just how you were. I rubbed the back of my neck. And then I thought about it the rest of the day. That's when I knew it was a problem. That's not a problem, she said softly. It felt like one. Why? I looked at her. Because you were the most important thing I had, and I didn't want to be the reason it stopped working. Leah uncurled from the couch. She put her feet on the floor and set the laptop on the cushion beside her, and sat with both hands wrapped around the tea mug. Her knuckles were a little white. Outside, the streetcar went by again, that low rumble that always made the windows rattle slightly. I had a version of this conversation in my head, she said. Probably about 100 times. What happened in those versions depended on the day. Her voice was honest. Some of them went badly, and the other ones? She looked at the mug. Then at me. The other ones I said something first. That landed somewhere between my ribs and stayed there. Why didn't you? I asked. She laughed a little, but it was short and had something rueful in it. Same reason you didn't. You were the constant. Everyone else moved around, but you were the constant. And I thought, if I said it wrong, or too soon, or at a bad time, or if I was just off about what I thought I was reading, then I'd have broken the only thing I was sure of. I thought about the last 4 years, the way I had always known which side of the street she preferred to walk on, the way she knew I needed 10 minutes of quiet after a hard day and never pushed. The way we had negotiated everything without having to negotiate anything, because it had always just been instinctive between us. We've been fairly stupid, I said. Very, she agreed. 4 years. 4 years. Your sister knew. My sister has been knowing for 3 of those 4 years, and has exercised what I can only describe as heroic restraint and the coffee in January, I said. The coffee in January, I said. That was, she said carefully, not a coincidence. I sat with that for a second. The warm kitchen light, the mug, the laptop. The way she was looking at me like she was still deciding whether this was actually happening, or whether something was going to interrupt it. I stood up from the chair. Not fast, not like I had a plan, just because sitting across from her while we were apparently finally having this conversation felt like the wrong configuration. She tracked the movement without moving herself. Waiting. Your sister's going to be insufferable about this, I said. Completely insufferable, Leah agreed. She's going to bring it up at Christmas and at every family dinner for approximately the next decade. Worth it? She looked at me, and the expression she had, not guarded, not performed, just hers, made me feel like I had said something in a language I had been learning for 4 years without realizing it. Ask me in a minute, she said. So I stepped around the coffee table, and she didn't lean away. I sat down on the couch beside her, and for a second we just looked at each other in the lamplight, with the November streetcar going by outside, like nothing significant was happening. And then I put my hand against her face. Carefully, the way you handle something you've been trying not to want for a long time, and she leaned into it before I had fully landed. Which was the thing that undid me completely. She kissed me first, technically, just barely. She closed the distance just a moment before I did, and it was soft and warm, and it lasted longer than I had any coherent thoughts about. And when we pulled back, she had her hand in the front of my sweater, and her forehead tipped toward mine, and we sat there in the quiet without either of us needing to say anything. Okay, she said finally. Yeah? Worth it. I laughed. She did too, and somehow, that was better than any version of this I had ever run in the background of my own head, because it was still us. She was still Leah. She still had opinions about things I hadn't asked about, and she was still sitting on my couch, with borrowed cushions, and a laptop she hadn't fully put away, and none of that had changed. The soup pot was still on the stove. Her LCBO tote bag was still by the door. There was Parmesan on the kitchen counter. "Your deadline," I said. She groaned. "I know. How much is left? 45 minutes of work, maybe." She glanced at the laptop. "If I focus." "So focus." She looked at me sideways. "You're telling me to go back to work." "I'm telling you to finish the thing you came here to finish. Right after. Right after, yes." I picked up her mug from the coffee table and handed it back to her. "I'll be in the chair. I'll be here when you're done." Leah looked at the mug in her hands. Then at me. There was something in her face that I didn't have a word for yet. Something between relieved and like she was still catching up to the fact that this was real. "Okay," she said. She opened the laptop. I went back to the chair and picked up my book and did not read a single word of it. For the next 45 minutes. I sat there while she worked, and the building settled around us, and the radiator creaked, and outside the city did what the city did at midnight. And I thought about the January snowstorm and the coffee from 3 blocks further away, and 4 years of a Thursday that had always felt like the best part of my week. She closed the laptop at 12:18. "Done," she said. "Good, the client is going to love it. They should. They might not appreciate it fully." She set the laptop on the coffee table. "Clients rarely do. Their loss." She pulled the sweatshirt sleeves over her hands. "I should go home. It's past midnight. I'm 3 blocks away. It's November." She gave me a look. "No, stay," I said. "Couch, I have blankets. You can check the client email in the morning before you go." She was quiet for a second. Not deciding. She had already decided. I could see it. She was just letting the moment exist before she moved through it. That was also a Leah thing. "There's leftover soup," I added. "That clinches it," she said. In the morning she was at my kitchen table with coffee. When I came out of my room, laptop open. Client email already responded to. She had also, somehow, found the good mug. Not the regular stack of them near the front of the cabinet, but the ceramic one someone had given me 3 Christmases ago, that I used maybe twice a year and which lived in the back corner, and was using it like it was obvious. "How did you know that mug was back there?" I asked. She looked up. "I've been in your kitchen approximately 300 times. You've never used that mug before." "Ah, I thought today was a good day for it." She went back to the screen. "There's coffee in the pot." I stood in my kitchen doorway, in the gray November morning light, with the radiator ticking, and Leah at my table in her stretched cuff sweatshirt, answering client emails, and I thought about how completely ordinary it looked. How completely right. 3 weeks later, we went to her sister's place for dinner. Her sister opened the door, looked at us standing on the porch, looked at Leah, looked at me, looked back at Leah, and said, "Finally. I have been waiting for this dinner for 3 years. Come in, there's wine." Leah turned to me on the doorstep, with an expression that said, "I told you, and I know, and this is going to be a long dinner all at once." I took her hand. That was new. That was the only new thing, really. Everything else, the way we talked, the way we moved around each other, the way she knew which coffee place I liked, and I knew how she took her tea. All of that had always been there. It just had a name now. Not best friend. That word had always been too small for it. It had always been Leah. It had probably always been Leah. From a corner coffee shop, on a morning when a barista got my order wrong, and a stranger leaned in and said, "You don't look like an oat milk person." She was right then. She's usually right. I've stopped pretending. That surprises me.